Good to go. Here we go. Hello and welcome to the Macworld podcast. I'm senior editor Roman Loyola. Everyone's in studio for this podcast. Sitting at the table with me are Jason Cross and Leif Johnson. Hello, fellas.
Hello.
And we're also joined by the most important man in the room, producer Dan Masuoka.
Thank you, Roman.
Hi, Dan. Dan's the most important man in the room because he's monitoring our Twitter and YouTube feeds. We're live on Twitter and YouTube. Mm-hmm. Well, amongst other reasons. But the main reason why he's the most important room is because he's representing you, the viewer who's watching us right now. If you guys got any comments or questions about the topics we're talking about or any other topics in general, Dan's keeping a track of YouTube and Twitter, and he'll let us know what you guys are thinking, and he'll chime in with your thoughts and questions. So today's topics, we're talking about iPhone news and rumors. We're talking about Swift Playgrounds for adults. It's not just for kids.
It's the late at night version of Swift Playgrounds.
Yes, the late night version of Swift Playgrounds.
Swift Playgrounds after dark.
But first, we're going to talk about the Mac Pro. Last week, Matthew Panzarino over at TechCrunch. I almost said something else, but over at TechCrunch, because Matthew just posted something about on Twitter. I follow him on Twitter, and he's also a sneakerhead. And he posted something about some new Adidas shoes, and I was like, "Oh, cool!" Because I'm like a reformed sneakerhead. But he had an exclusive. He met with some folks at Apple to talk about the Mac Pro, and one of the main points that were made in the story is that the Mac Pro is going to ship in 2019. So if anybody watching, you're excited about this, you're not excited about this, you're disappointed, or what would you like to see in a Mac Pro, let us know on Twitter and on YouTube. Let us know what you think about the Mac Pro, the recent news that it's coming out in 2019. It was a very interesting article because while Matthew wasn't given any specific details about the Mac Pro itself, it was very much about how they're going about designing this particular product.
Yeah, and other products that we talked about, the other Macs. Yeah, I should say.
Yeah, so they're doing this workflow approach, which when you read about it, makes you go, you mean companies aren't doing that already?
Yes, well, I was really wondering.
So the detail, they called it Pro Workflow Team.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the idea was a little different. I mean, companies do this, but what they did is they went and found actual professionals who outside Apple, people who use Logic and
Final Cut
and Premiere and stuff like that. Just people who used Macs professionally in their professional work environments. And they brought them into Apple and like either hired them or hired them as contractors to like work at Apple.
Yes.
And then they watched what they do and said like, oh, well, this is slow when I do this. Or every time that I pop open this window, it hangs for 30 seconds while it does this. Or I always do these 5 steps in a row. Could it be one step and stuff? And so they're looking at all those.
That they weren't doing this before.
Well, I mean, I'm sure Apple does this with their own people.
Yeah,
the idea that they bring and they've always talked to outside people. But the problem is this: the problem is like if you have a pro, like a real professional pro who's working, who's a video editor, they're working on stuff that you're not allowed to see.
Yeah,
they're working on a movie or a commercial or something like that. That Apple's not allowed to go in there and see what they're working on. So the idea of like hiring them at least as contract people to bring them in, and then here's what you work on stuff internally for Apple, so that they can see what their process is, and they're finding out things that aren't just about designing the next Mac Pro. They're finding out things like, oh, that must be a driver bug we never knew about, or something, or we should just optimize that part of the program, And so it's informing their software, but it's informing their hardware design, and they said. They even went out of their way to say not just the Mac Pro, like Mac laptops and stuff, which makes me really happy because there's no way they're bringing in all these pros and they're going to be happy with the Mac Pro laptops only having USB-C plugs and no SD card slots and stuff. Like that's ridiculous. You know, they've got to be going like these dongles, man.
Yeah.
Well, see, I guess what I mean was, because you might be working on a movie or something. Somebody was working on that, but one of the cases that he talked about in the article was someone talking about you're opening up a window and it takes like 5 seconds, and over a specific thing, and over time these add up. But the problem is, I use like Adobe Lightroom, Photoshop here at work and stuff like that, and I get used to seeing those little slowdowns. So even if you are, just a journalist or something like that, and you're used to it, I'm really surprised that they don't have. I mean, even if you work at Apple, you got to be working with images and stuff, and I'm surprised they don't notice those little slowdowns in the program, and especially being Apple, because they used to be so associated with the creative community, and it's just like this should be your thing. Yeah,
I think they do. I think they do in the cases of the people like us, like who are just like, oh, why is this slow? And there's nothing they can do about Adobe. If it's a driver bug, it's a driver bug, and they can find out. But I think there's a gap between that and what people do when they're working on a movie or something like that. That there's probably a difference in the features they use and how often they use them. That may not run into that.
Well, there was a key line in there, which I thought was interesting, where it was talking about it wasn't just Apple stuff, that they were using other programs as well to get that same experience. So.
Yeah. That's certainly true that the professional world does not run on Final Cut.
Right.
There's plenty of them do, but there's, absolutely.
Yeah, if I'm going to bring up a certain point, but before I do, if there are anybody's watching who is experienced in product development, be interesting to hear what you have to say about this.
Well, Enlighten Up on Twitter is saying a new chip without AMT this time, please. What exactly is AMT?
It is. Why can't I think of it? It is.
And I'm curious about how much it would be a matter of software optimization when it's just apps loading slow versus how much do they really have to redesign how much is their hardware?
And that's kind of what Jason was bringing up about, they can keep that within their own wheelhouse, but when it's someone else, that's going to be a problem as well.
Yeah, it's both. Like sometimes it's software, and they're not. Of course, they're also looking at things like, well, I need a bunch of stuff I need to plug in these things. These are the things I plug into my Mac every time I have to pull in data off my camera or something like that, and I can't do it without this dongle, or it's a slow bus or whatever. And those are the things that are going to help them design the next Mac Pro. Those are the hardware type things that they're going to have to worry about.
And Enlighten Up says AMT is V Pro.
So AMT, Intel Active Management Technology,
Yeah.
Is that what he's talking about?
Why would they get rid of V Pro on the Mac Pro? I think they want that because it helps them with the virtualization stuff, and I think they want that on the Mac Pro.
Who knows at this point?
There's a contingent of people within the sort of tech community of especially the real enthusiasts who don't like AMT because it's a black box. It lets Intel push updates that could disable your computer, or that people are scared that it could put backdoors in your computer, stuff like that. And part of the security management of it is that it is a black box, and AMD has its sort of equivalent thing that people are like, you need to open source this so we can make sure it's not doing something funny in our computers. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think the contracts that Intel has with things like defense contractors and government agencies and stuff like that all around the world, they're not going to produce chips that don't have those things anymore.
Well, if Apple ever does really go to doing its own chips, then that'll probably go away.
So that's the part of this that I kind of wanted to get to, is that it's 2000. I was a little disappointed that it's not going to come this year, because a year ago they said, oh, the Mac Pro, we're doing a new Mac Pro. It's going to be all modular. Don't worry about it. And we said, but it's not coming this year. And we're like, oh, for sure, 2018 then. And now we're hearing, no, it's 2019. But I was curious how you think this fits into the rumors of, first of all, Marzipan, which was like the running iOS apps on your macOS, and then the further step of, well, maybe Apple dumping Intel and going with its own processors. Do you think these things go together, or are we just talking about different stuff?
Yeah, I have a hard time thinking that they would transition their Mac hardware that abruptly to to Apple's own ARM processor. That
Right.
seems almost suicidal to me.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I've been thinking. I don't know if it's felt like people haven't really been talking about that.
Right. Because you can't throw that kind of wrench into people's workflows, and I'm sure that's what they're learning with their own research. So, yeah, the more I think about transitioning to ARM, the more I think it's going to be on the consumer level. Maybe we'll finally see a Mac Mini with an ARM processor,
Yeah.
but that won't happen until like 2020. So
Right.
they'll still be charging how much they charge for the Mac Mini now that they did 4 years ago when it came out.
Yeah.
So
I wouldn't be surprised if the Mac Pro and MacBook Pro laptops eventually do run some Apple-made processor,
Yeah.
but they're going to be the last thing to transition.
Right, yeah.
Like it's going to start with the cheapest consumer laptop, with the MacBook or the
Right.
MacBook Air,
Right.
or whatever new product
Yeah.
gets that. It's going to start with that. It's going to start with some Mac Mini update or something like
Right.
that, and then it'll go into things like the iMac, and then the Pros will be the last because they need these.
Yes.
Those systems have
yeah,
heavy hardware, lots of lots of threads, lots of
Yeah.
cache, big stuff, and it's not like Apple can't make a chip that does those things, but that's going to come last.
yeah.
So I have a question. So like, how powerful can an ARM-based chip get? Because like, I've always thought of it as being like more power efficient, and that's why they're used on like phones and whatever. But what's the most powerful ARM chip out there right now?
That gets complicated. I don't know what the most powerful, like total most powerful ARM chip out there. It could be an iPad's chip. There's ARM processors made to run servers, but they're really relatively low power. They're made to run data servers where you just have a whole bunch of storage, and they have a lot of I/O cache and stuff like that.
Right,
on the
and
cache.
processing speed's not necessarily.
Yeah, they're not doing a bunch of database queries and stuff like that. That's all being done somewhere else. These are just running storage controllers and stuff, and then it's all about power efficiency. So it's either one of those or it's something like an A10X or an A11X
Yeah.
That's what I was
coming this year or something. But there's really no technical reason why an ARM processor can't be as powerful as the latest, high-end
Right.
100-watt
So
AMD and Intel chips. They're not optimized for that. But
Right.
if you built a chip that sucked in 100 watts and had a bunch of cache and a whole bunch of, and a lot of cores and a lot of threads and a lot of execution units and stuff. There's no technical limit why ARM can't have more execution units per core and all this other stuff. They can do that.
Yeah.
It could happen.
that's an interesting question, Dan, because like back in the day when Apple was using Motorola and they were using the PowerPC chips, there was this whole CISC
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And the PowerPC chips hit a ceiling, a performance ceiling.
Yeah.
It was hard to get beyond 3 gigahertz. It was just I don't know if there was a
I mean, up until recently, it was hard for AMD just to keep up with Intel, right?
Right.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, and not because of an x86 versus
Yeah.
ARM versus CISC thing. And even today's modern processors, they're not like an modern Intel Core i7 or something. They're CISC processors, but they're not really.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
like they translate those instructions to a machine code, and within the execution units, they're more like RISC processors. It's really it gets really complicated.
Yeah.
The steps that a piece of machine code goes through before it gets executed and gets turned back into usable data coming out of that chip. There's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
Phil Allen on YouTube is saying, could the ARM rumors be linked to hardball commercial negotiations with Intel for future chips? So is this maybe just a chess game?
It could be,
That's something people brought up. Like they leak a rumor that they're going to drop Intel and use their own chips
Yeah.
as part of getting a better deal out of Intel.
So
Maybe.
Gordon Ma-Ung, who's a editor over at PC World, and he's very much into processors and stuff, and he covers Intel. We had, when the whole ARM rumor thing was breaking, we had a discussion. He likes to talk about potential CPUs and Apple products and stuff. And he's also very much into conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he was pushing this idea that he thinks that maybe this is possibly just one way of Apple to get better prices from Intel, because Intel is their sole provider of processors.
Yeah.
And Intel can get away with pushing whatever price they want.
It doesn't have to be. AMD could be, but the AMD's power efficiency is so bad that Apple's laptop thing, it's just now getting decent with their newest Ryzen chips on laptops, but it's still that would be a worry for Apple. So I think this is the way I think the transition's going to go. We see already in the iMac Pro, they have that. Is it T2 or T3?
Right.
What is it? T2.
The T2 chip the
T2 chip,
the touch bar, and other things.
Well, the touch bar in the Mac Pro and then the iMac Pro.
Right, the iMac Pro
has a T2 or whatever.
Right,
it's the next version of that.
Right.
And it does more. It does
Secure Enclave.
It's the Secure Enclave, and it controls the boot, but it's also, they use the image processor in there on the webcam. They do the audio controller and stuff is all that chip's audio.
Right.
That chip is basically, I know that chip is like an A9 or something with a bunch of chunks disabled. Like there's no, right?
Right.
So I think that's the way the transition's going to go. This Marzipan, like run iOS on your Mac thing, that may not be all Macs. That might, or it might be with emulation, but then new Macs run it better because they're going to sneak in a T3 or a T4 or some new chip that's actually an A10 or something into Macs. And they're going to use it for security, and they're going to use it for audio processing, all that. But they're also going to just start using it to run iOS apps, and then they're going to make tools for developers to make iOS apps run in a window and resizable and stuff like that. And then eventually that's going to they're going to phase out the Intel things and say, well, just run the iOS apps. Now that they're, after a couple of years of developers being able to make iOS apps that run in Windows and have drag and drop out of the things and all this other stuff, then they're, that's the transition is they're going to bring in those T series chips, and then they're going to grow and phase out Intel. And so that's the multi-step process.
Right.
It's going to take years.
Yeah, it's going to take years. So we did do a Twitter poll yesterday to see what people are interested in. The question that we asked is, now that you know that the Mac Pro is shipping in 2019, are you considering an iMac Pro? So the results are in, and we've got 25% said yes, they are considering an iMac Pro now, which is part of the reason why Apple wanted to disclose this, because they didn't want people to sit around thinking that a new Mac Pro was coming this year. In a way, it's kind of funny. This is a way to boost sales of the iMac Pro.
I'm surprised they admitted that, but they made a good point that it's like, this is a machine mostly like companies buy, enterprise buy, and they have yearly budgets, and they don't want people holding on to their yearly budget, anticipating a Mac Pro when it ain't going to hit their yearly budget.
Yeah. And then 39% said no, and 36% said they're not interested in either the Mac Pro and iMac Pro, which is not that surprising considering our readership. We're a consumer-based publication. Most of our readers are using MacBook Pros, MacBooks, consumer iMacs. So it's not that surprising that not interested in either was ranked so highly in our polls. So couple of comments. One person wants a new Mac Mini.
Oh yes.
Yeah, everybody anytime you mention a new Mac, someone's got to go, I want a new Mac Mini.
And one person talked about how the iMac Pro is not what high-profile VR, AR, ML developers need. They need slots. They need the expandability. They need a modular Mac Pro. Joseph Angel Acosta said that on Twitter. That's...
Yeah, they can put all the USB ports on an iMac Pro that they want, but that's not real expandability.
It's definitely not modular.
Well, one of the things that Matthew Panzarino pointed out in his article was he talked about how he got to see some of the ways people were set up in these workflows, and one of the ways that was set up is that like they had the Mac Pro set up, but it was also attached to a couple of iPads running. Well, was it Logic or one of the Pro apps? Basically,
I think it was
using
Logic, yeah.
Yeah, basically using the iPads as the UI, so they can tap into that. So I guess Apple is trying to. What I think Panzerino's point was, modularity may mean more than just slots and open bays. So,
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a way that Apple
Yeah.
is going. Is they want to say, your being modular isn't just you can replace your graphics card
Right,
in a couple of years,
right.
or slap in more RAM.
right,
They're like, we make all these other products you can buy too.
right, exactly.
But let's hope it's that too, as well as being able to slot in other stuff as well.
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah.
So-
I think that's So I mean, Apple would love it if you bought a couple of iPads to go along with your Mac Pro. They would absolutely love that, and that. But also, people are apparently using it that way. So yeah, so, but yeah, so. Oh, what I wanted to make a point about product design is that. So my wife is a product manager for a software company, a large software company, and one of the things that is interesting that when we talk about stuff is kind of this gap between a user's needs and demands and engineering and design. So because engineering and design, while they create the software, they're not necessarily using the software on a daily basis.
Right.
So, and I think this has always been a challenge in software development where, the engineers and the designers and stuff, they're not using the product that they're making on a daily basis because they're creating software. That's their job.
Yeah.
So, so this workflow kind of process, be interesting to see if it catches on with other companies. I guess it all depends on what Apple comes out with eventually.
Right.
If it's clear that the products that they're releasing are benefiting from this particular process or not. I mean, I could easily see, them come out with a product and people go, how is this any better from,
Right.
it doesn't seem like you guys benefited from using this workflow process. I don't get, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Those gaps are still there, so to speak.
Right.
So, like the one example that Panzerino talked about, and you talked about earlier, was the person who uses a particular part of the UI daily, but it takes like 6 to 10 seconds to refresh all the time. And if you're using that particular part of the UI 100 times a day, that's a lot of time lost. And that's an example of the disconnect that you often see with software developers and the actual users.
Right.
So, and then I think Apple found out that it was simply a graphics driver issue that they
Right.
couldn't
Yeah.
just fix. Yeah, that it turned out to be a really easy fix.
But it's good to have that on hand that where
Right.
it goes.
Right.
Because so much of the software development, even though it could be good ideas, and that accounts for so much software, it's like it starts in theory, and then
Right.
we release it into the wild, and then we start actually adjusting to how users use it. And I think having different people that actually use it the way it's intended to be used right there at the development
Yeah.
process could do. I think it's important to have different perspectives, though. I don't think one artist is going to be different from
Yeah,
another.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
your
so-
team has to be diverse enough in what they're doing and how
Right.
they do it and stuff.
Right.
But you hear all the time, Adobe, for example, talk about how closely they work with developers. But do they bring a developer into
Right,
Adobe?
right.
A developer, bring a photographer into Adobe and say, you work here for a month. We're
Right.
paying you to work here. We're going to watch what you do, but
Mm-hmm.
like do what you normally do. Shooting some stuff for our creative ads and stuff. We're hiring
Yeah.
you to do that, and you're going to do it here, and we're going to see what your workflow is, just to figure out that, like, oh, this thing that's 3 menus deep, like you hit
Yeah.
you go 3 menus deep and hit that button all the time. Maybe that should be a button on our UI,
Right.
Yeah.
So, kind of tying into, I know we've mostly been talking about hardware because, it's the Mac Pro and this workflow process is being developed in Mac Pro, but it seems like it's also, or at least Panzerino indirectly pointed out that it's helping Apple make better software, which is sort of a transition to something that Ming-Chi Kuo came out with today in some kind of report or something, talking about how Apple has kind of fallen behind in terms of software innovation.
Yeah, I don't know
So-
what the context of that report was. 'Cause
Yeah.
he's usually talking. Usually, he's looking at sort of Apple's supply chain and trying to predict for investors what's Apple going to do, so that investors can make wise investment. He works for an investment company. That's
Right.
Yeah. So I'm not sure what the context of him coming out with this report saying like Apple's innovation challenges haven't been hardware; they've been software.
Yeah.
And I've noticed that a lot of the people that were commenting on it were, they were basing it, so here, the bugs with iOS 11 and stuff, and they were saying, that they need to clean that stuff up. But similar, people were having a hard time reaching what he understood with that. I personally think that, it's just like I'm one of those people that likes to use Google products on my Apple device. So, it's one of the things where I think they're more intuitive. And I think I can agree with that assessment that, it's not, as good as it could be.
I'm going to channel Mike Simon here a bit and just say that I think Apple's longstanding process of how it updates its software is part of the problem. Like that it bundles together all these app updates with its core operating system updates. Like Apple Photos doesn't get an update if Mac OS doesn't get an update and iOS doesn't get an update. And that's kind of a problem because the pace of innovation, I'm sure, of that team is probably pretty high. They'll come out with a new version. There'll be some new features in Photos in iOS 12 when iOS 12 drops. And they'll probably have something that they were working on that 2 months later is ready to go. And now they got to hold it for iOS 13.
Yeah.
If it's not a bug fix or something,
Right.
and that's especially challenging in this new world of machine learning and AI accelerated apps. Photos is a great example with all the face detection and stuff like that. Like you want to iterate quickly. So I think Apple separating out its app updates from its OS updates would probably be a helpful way for them to, if not be more innovative, seem more innovative, seem to have more regular releases of more updated stuff. Because the only thing that kind of updates now is things that are data related, like Apple Maps. They'll add in like, oh, we've got indoor maps for these malls now. That's just data. That's not a change in the app per se, right? Yeah. So I would like to see them move to that model where all of their apps kind of are free to update features outside of the OS.
So speaking of updates, we're about 6 months away from an iPhone update.
Yeah, you see how I teed you up there?
Thank you very much. I was thinking, I was picturing Jason putting the ball on the tee and me getting loose with the driver. So we're about 6 months away from an iPhone update, and there was a recent report by the Economic
Daily News.
Economic Daily News, which is
Electronic Daily News?
maybe EDM. We'll call
Yes,
it's not electronic dance music.
It's Chinese.
It's a Chinese
Economic
website.
Daily News.
Yeah.
Yes. That stated that that Apple is working on an iPhone with a 3-lens system. Is that right?
3 cameras. Yeah.
3-camera system, which EDM has always been kind of shaky in terms of the rumor front.
And this is for next year's iPhone.
Yes.
This isn't
Oh,
the
not-
fall's,
not
this
this
fall's
one.
iPhone.
2019.
They said a 2019 iPhone.
2019. Okay.
So they're even trying to predict next year's iPhone, which is already one strike of like, well, maybe.
Right.
And then also, they've been hit and miss.
Yeah.
But I think part of it's they were looking at suppliers, and
Right.
Huawei
Huawei has a 3-lens phone.
has a 3-lens phone,
So-
and people have been really complimentary about its photo performance.
Yeah, Adam Murray, one of our other video producers, he has the phone. He was showing it to me this morning, and it's a 3-lens phone. It's kind of odd to see 3 lenses on the
know,
back of
that's
it.
weird.
Was he trying to gloat it in your face?
Yeah, he was.
Yeah.
Check this out.
Did he also show you the other side of it?
He did not.
There's a notch.
There's a notch.
Oh, there's
A notch.
Well, that's Huawei. I'm surprised.
so.
Everybody's doing the notch now.
Yeah.
That's the Android thing. Yeah.
it seems like so many of these focus on the the low lighting and the the type of definition though that you could do it. But the Lenovo Fab 2 Pro and the Zenfone AR both also have 3 cameras, but they're used there for AR. And since Apple is making this big AR push, I wonder if instead of photo quality, which I think a lot of people are focused on, this is actually supposed to make AR better, where you'd almost have something similar. To where it can read the surroundings a lot better and find depth. And because I believe one of them is an infrared. Yeah, infrared lens for depth and distance, and there's also a motion tracking.
Yeah,
sensor.
the ones that's Intel's RealSense thing that's on the Zenfone AR and all, and that's I believe. Yeah, I think so. But it's they have it's a standard it's like a 2-lens system like we have now, and then the third one's not really a camera in the traditional sense. Whereas what the claim was in this EDN article is that it is supposed to be a traditional camera. And it's going to be more zoom.
I saw that. But.
And the more camera data you have, whether it's infrared or otherwise, that'll help you.
Yes.
Do AR, but a really good zoom lens is not really what AR needs. It needs more. It needs more width. It needs to see more. It needs to see more wide angle. And maybe that's what Apple would do. Maybe they would have their wide angle be a little wider, the standard, and then the zoom be a little more zoom. I honestly don't know that they need to go to a third camera. Anyways, I think you look at something like what the Pixel 2 can do with one camera, and you think, well, 2 should be plenty. After that, it's computation.
Right. Yeah. The third, the 3 lens thing certainly seems like a short-term kind of solution
right
now. So that Apple would kind of sit there and go, well, no, that's not the way to do it.
Yeah. Now I wouldn't be surprised, like you said, if they added a sensor that we wouldn't even necessarily call a camera on the back. That's a lot like, let's say, it's a lot like the TrueDepth sensor, except not optimized for your arm's length, optimized for a room. And do something like that. That I think they would do. Totally. Because they're really going hard into AR.
And because, to me, at least, the Huawei phone, it seems like it's, let's do as big as we can. Let's add more lenses like razors and stuff.
Yeah, it's like the 6-blade razor.
Yes, exactly.
I want to see the side of the phone with, lenses just all the way across. That'd be crazy.
There is a company across the street that has, I want to say, 20 lenses.
Yeah.
But it's not a phone. It's like a camera.
Yeah. Isn't it the light camera?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was getting a bunch of PR about that, I think, last week. I think they were shipping last week or something.
Yeah, they've been talking about that camera for a couple of years. I think they're finally ready to ship, and
but it's crazy looking.
It's a weird. It looks like a bug's eye. It's like an Instamatic or something, but it's got 12 lenses on the back, and they're all different focal lengths and widths, and they do a bunch of computational photography to get you to, and you can do the refocusing and stuff, but you do that on phones, but it's much higher quality. What's the name of the camera?
The Light L16 camera.
L16.
The 16 cameras.
16 cameras.
Almost $2,000.
Yeah.
So
that's a lot of sensors. They're not just lenses. There's sensors behind each of these things,
So you say the Mac Mini question always comes up when we're talking about Macs.
Yeah.
But the other question that comes up with iPhones is iPhone SE.
Yep.
Yeah, so
What do you got to talk about that?
when I said that EDM is somewhat shaky, one of the things that they did, they predicted that an iPhone SE2 would come out this spring, and that was reported by them last year, I think.
They were the second ones to report that too.
Yeah.
There was another
outlet
watching it that said maybe that'll happen.
And it hasn't happened. I mean, actually, I think the EDM report said in the first half of 2018, so we have 2 months left.
But it's not like they're going to surprise spring and iPhone SE2.
Apple's cycle is come and gone.
Yeah.
They don't. That means they wouldn't release something in June. So,
but I don't think that product is dead. I don't think that product line is dead. I think maybe they're just their cycle is gonna be different, and they're gonna stuff it in with the regular iPhone announcements in the fall or something.
It might be a fall update.
But that's a big. As much as it has fans here in the U.S. and in Europe and stuff who just want a smaller phone that's kind of modern, It's really big in India, and that's the push. And
Yeah.
it's produced in India. It's not manufactured in China and stuff.
Yeah.
Their assembly is in India and stuff. And that's really, they're really going after that market with that cheaper and smaller phone.
Yeah.
And they can't just let the iPhone SE languish
No.
with its A9 processor, I think it has, and everything.
Yeah.
It's probably always going to be a step behind because of its size, but
Right.
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if this fall they kick one out.
Yeah, it'll probably get an update Sunday. I just hope it doesn't fall into iPod Touch kind of,
Yes.
Yeah.
where it's kind of forgotten, but it's still there.
or Mac Mini, as people say.
Or is the Mac Mini, right?
But
So-
their cycle for that could be 2 years. That could
Right.
be, it might just not be updated every year. It
Right.
just might
Yeah.
be something that
Yeah.
they don't do as often.
So if it came out this fall, do you think it would have an A10 or an A11 chip in it?
That's a good question.
I think it would still have an A9. Maybe.
Really?
Oh, I doubt it.
I would
It'd be
have to
at
say an
least
A10,
I would
yes.
say it'd be at least an A10. Remember, the A12 will be in the new phones
Yeah.
this
That's
fall,
true.
right? So it's
I
going to
think they
be.
go for a 10.
I think they'd go for a 10, but it's, well, yeah. I'm thinking like cellular radio issues might be the
Right.
reason they would go with an
That's-
even newer chip, but it's expensive.
That's what I was, it's expensive. And so,
A10s aren't. A10s are in the Apple TVs and stuff. Like they're
Right.
They're still cranking those out.
yeah. And I don't know, is there a power consumption? I don't know what the power consumption is of the A10 versus the A9, and if that's an issue at all. Does the
It
A10,
shouldn't be. I don't think it's going to be more.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
But I feel like at least here, not everyone is buying the SE for cost reasons. I think a lot of people
Right.
just it's the size
They
reason.
want the
Oh,
smaller
totally, yeah.
phone. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it doesn't seem like they're going smaller. It seems like the smallest phone they've got on deck is the size of the iPhone 10, which is
Yeah.
a little less narrow than. It's about as wide as. I think it's about as wide as a regular, like an
I
iPhone
think
8.
so. It's
The
just
non
taller,
plus,
you're right.
it's just taller.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have a bigger. The cheap one's going to be bigger, and then
But
there'll be
an
a plus
LCD
that'll
display.
be yeah, and then there'll be a plus that'll
Right.
be even bigger.
Yeah. So,
And Michael Pareto on YouTube is asking, how about any news with iPads?
yeah, so
They just released one.
iPad, how about a Pro? New Pro?
So, in case you missed it, Apple, so there was a new, but that will probably be another fall release.
I think they're talking about pros.
They've been announcing the Pro. They've been announcing iPad Pros at WWDC,
These things.
Right.
and that's
yeah,
where we would expect.
That's
that
true.
to
They
happen.
probably, yeah. Especially because WWDC this year, when they made an announcement earlier this year that the OSs, both Mac and iOS, are undergoing, I don't want to call them maintenance releases, but
Right.
they're not going to be chock full of features, supposedly. So they need something to showcase, and they'll probably showcase some hardware at WWDC, and you could see them doing an iPad Pro. Especially now that the new low-cost iPad is here with pencil support. They sort of need to do something with iPad Pro
To make it.
to make it, a more attractive product again.
Yeah.
Because as you pointed out, it's perfectly fine
Yes.
for a lot of people. Even people who might be considered pros could even consider it. So
And I've had people send me DMs on Twitter that say, yeah, they actually like it better than their Pro because they had bigger ones just like I did. But they said, that for what they're using it for, the power difference isn't that much. So yeah, they really have to do something to make the Pro stand out now.
yeah.
So
In other iPhone news, there's a new product red iPhone.
Oh right.
So-
Yeah.
It's the 8 models.
It's the 8
So-
models and a new case for the 10.
Yes.
Right. A leather case, I think.
Yeah,
I saw that this morning.
Which is like, I mean,
Well, what I was telling Leif this morning, I was like, if they came out with a product red iPhone 10, or if they came out with a product red glass iPhone, I would be all over that. I
Okay.
would even wait. Like if we knew it was going to come out, because the product red products usually come out a few months after the initial product releases. They aren't released at the same time as the new products. But I'd be willing to wait if we knew that there was going to be a product red glass iPhone, because that red glass would probably look pretty cool.
yeah.
But we don't know. since they came out with the red case, they didn't come out with red glass. Maybe red glass is cost prohibitive or just doesn't look good or hard to do. I don't know, but
Yeah, that
Doesn't seem
maybe
like-
maybe the way they're splitting like they're already kind of doing colors with the
Right.
anodized aluminum
Yeah.
for the regular iPhones with the rose gold and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
maybe the process isn't that different. And
Yeah.
it would be for the iPhone 10.
Right.
And now they're making too many different shells, and I don't know.
yeah,
But my guess is that since they released the case, and they didn't do cases for the 8, I mean, you
Right.
get the phone, right? So I think that's their answer. I don't think that they're
Right.
gonna.
yeah,
You
But
have
it
to wait
does
till
look
next
cool.
year for the next iPhone
yeah.
product red.
But yeah, that's out. I think is it the same price as the regular iPhone 8s? I don't remember now.
I believe
believe
it's
it
the
is.
same price. I think they're shipping this weekend because
They start
took
shipping on
pre-orders.
Friday.
Yeah, they start
Yeah.
shipping on Friday, and the proceeds go to AIDS
It's benefit.
Yeah.
benefit,
So
as all the product red stuff does.
right.
You don't hear a lot about product red products anymore.
No.
No, you don't. There was that initial push, and there was
Yeah.
like
for a
they came
couple of
out-
years, a lot of
Yeah.
companies did a lot of products, and you don't hear so much about it.
Yeah.
Mostly it's Apple these days, I would say, when you hear about it. So with the release
Yeah, I
of the
can't even
phones.
think of any other. Nothing comes off the top of my head of other companies that do product red products anymore.
I know
Yeah.
some people even think it's like an Apple thing as opposed
Yeah,
to that's how
true.
associated
it's
it
so
is.
associated now that they think it's Apple.
That's an interesting. It's become associated with Apple. That's interesting.
That's the gravity well of Apple's
Right.
like PR and stuff.
So, but yeah, that's the latest in iPhone news and rumors. Of course, they'll probably, as we get closer to the fall, they'll probably start to build up. So, speaking of building, Jason Cross took it upon himself to learn how to build an app,
Yeah.
but he didn't do it as probably most adults would do it.
Right. I took a look. I mean, Apple, they had their education event. And as part of that, I mean, they talked a bunch about schools, but they also talked about, and Tim Cook talked in his interview with MSNBC and stuff about how important they view education, and not just for kids, but that learning to code is incredibly important for everybody, and that adults need to learn how to code, and it has to be a continuing education thing. You may not become an app developer, but you need to learn what coding is and how it works, and it changes the way you're thinking. It's going to impact every job.
Right.
So even if you aren't a developer, and even if you don't write code for a living, you need to know what coding is and how it works, because that's going to have something to do with your job before long.
Right. It teaches you certain steps of logic, so to speak.
And you're going
Yeah.
to be talking to coders and having to explain
Yeah.
to them what you need and how
Yeah.
it needs to work and so. So I said, well, it's been a million years since I wrote any code. Like, you know, I was for a time a computer science major in college. I didn't end up getting a degree in computer science, but you know, and that was back in the day when we wrote C++ on Borland C++ compilers, which were like text editors,
Yeah.
right? On Sun workstations with those like mirrored
Yeah.
mouse pad things,
Right.
like that had to do those weird like first gen optical mouse thing.
Right.
Like that was state of the art. There weren't home computing. There were not modern development environments. It was bad. And that's the last time I wrote any like functional code of any kind outside of just some HTML, right? So I said, well, I'll learn Swift, and I'll learn it Apple's way. I'll load up Swift Playgrounds and see what this is like. And I was surprised what a useful thing that was still for adults.
Yeah.
In that at the first couple of lessons, it's so basic and juvenile that you're just like, I get it. I'm not 6. Come on, you know. But after that, you know, outside of the fact that you're guiding this little alien dude around called Byte, and you kind of drag and drop functions to your little, you know, text, little blocks of text you're dragging and dropping to make your little script code pieces. You really do learn useful coding principles, and you kind of solve puzzles that are engaging. They're like, you really do have to kind of think, okay, well, I have to do this and then I have to do that. Then I'll just repeat that part 4 times. And just so you learn how to break a problem into a bunch of smaller problems that you'll just call up like the solution for
Yeah.
multiple times, and you it gets into when you learn how arrays work and all these other stuff, and you write real Swift syntax. and
Yeah,
stuff. So
yeah.
you can take that to, I want to make an app. The problem
Right.
is you can't then make an app.
Right.
Like you get through your Swift playgrounds, and if you did it for an hour a day, you'd probably go through, as an adult, you'd probably go through Swift playgrounds 1 and 2 and learn a whole lot about code and how it works and what all these terms mean and everything in a couple weeks. You know, it would
Yeah.
not take that long. But then if you said, well, I want to write an app, even just a very simple app, just something to, you can't do it. You can't do that. You have to go to your Mac and you have to download Xcode. And then there's a whole other, you're staring at a blank page. You're like, well, what do I do now? Like, how do I make an app that runs on my
Right.
device?
Yeah.
And they have different teach yourself to, like, learn how to code stuff there.
Right.
But it's an ebook that you download, and then you download like project files and you step
boring.
through the project files with it. That's what it's been forever. That's how
Right. It's more traditional.
it's traditional, and it's really boring, and you're just following along this like book, and it's not at all the problem solving sort of game puzzle stuff that Swift Playgrounds is.
Yeah.
It would be good if they bridged that gap by, you know, kind of when you, there's a Swift Playgrounds 3 where you're not even guiding the alien anymore. You're making app-like things. That really needs to be a thing where you can go like, well, now you can sign into your iPhone with your iCloud thing and run your app. Like run your little
Right.
app and make an app that computes, you know, something simple like a what's a 15% tip. You know, you type in your amount and
Right.
it tells you what 15%
Yeah.
is. That would be, you're not going to put that in the App Store or anything, but that's a functional app that you could go, oh, I did something that really does something.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's what I was wondering is what the experience of using it is like. So are you basically, is it just like, you know, even though you got Byte and everything, is it
Right.
learning just like rote stuff like here's the script, or and I believe this is important for kids, I believe it's important for adults to actually see what you're doing. You know I got math a lot better
Yeah.
when I understood. I learned math best in astronomy. It was like, this is why I've been learning all this trig and stuff, is
Yeah.
to figure out parallax and stuff. Oh, I see it. So are you able to see that script become something like actually, you know,
Yeah.
use it in practice?
Yeah, what's great about what really works about Swift Playgrounds is right from the beginning, that's the way that it works. It's not just going like, figure out what the code needs to be to solve this puzzle. Congratulations, you got it right. What it does is it accepts, like a program, it accepts any solution that, like, if you have to, you'll have to make Byte, let's say, go along this, there's a environment, go along this environment and turn on all the off switches and ignore all the on switches. So you've got to go say, you've got to use like if statements and stuff. Say if it's off, turn it on and stuff. And you won't know which ones are which. So you have all these functions that are like move forward, turn left. Those are not real Swift functions, but the syntax, the way that they're written is just like real Swift functions. And you make your program and then you run it and you see him move around and he'll get stuck and you'll have to debug it and figure it out. And then it'll accept any solution that actually finishes the problem. It's not just looking for the right answer and then that's done. And that's one of the things that's really quite good about it,
like
is you
that.
get to see your code get literally step through your code as a guy steps around an environment and see where it's breaking. Oh, he turns left and just bumps into the wall there. I didn't mean to call that function again. I meant to move forward another and then call that function again. You can go fix that, you know, and then go through it again. And so, yeah, that's one of the things that's really brilliant about it, especially compared to other coding learning programs and stuff that I've been through, and they're just dry and boring. And they're just looking for the right answer. Yeah.
So I have two questions. One is, what's the youngest age you think someone would like get benefit out of Swift Playgrounds? And then two, if someone was actually trying to learn how to build an iPhone app, is this part of the route to go?
I would say a bright 6 or 8 year old that kind of did it with their parent, like, you know, you're both sitting there looking at the iPad, can certainly go through Swift Playgrounds. At least the first Swift Playgrounds 1. Once it gets to like Swift Playgrounds the Swift Playgrounds 3 set of things gets a little more abstract. And then any middle schooler you could just hand them the iPad and say, go through this. You know, they could totally do it. And in terms of, I want to make a real app. Is this the way to, if you know nothing about coding, I would say, spend the first couple weeks doing Swift Playgrounds. You're learning coding principles and concepts, but then you're going to have to, just like making any app, learning it anyway, then you're going to have to go to a Mac and get Xcode and go through like really writing and compiling an app and using like interface elements and stuff that they don't teach you until kind of Swift Playgrounds 3. They kind of start to teach you how buttons work, like actual on-screen buttons and things. But learning those concepts first. If you've ever done code before, if you know JavaScript or something like that, and you're just trying to learn Swift, I don't think you really need to step through Swift Playgrounds. You know what functions are and arrays and while loops and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if anybody's watching who wants to share how they learned how to use Swift, how to write Swift, it'd be interesting to see what they did.
I'm pretty sure you can write apps for Android phones with Swift now. I think the latest Android development kit accepts Swift. I'm pretty...
Right, it's probably
I'm trying to remember from last year's developer conference, from the Android developer conference was, I think they announced Swift support in their official development kit.
That seems to make sense. You know, there's probably a huge demand from iOS developers that they want to be able to bring their apps over to Android.
Traditionally, it's Java, and Java's got its own set of issues, right? You know, so.
Yeah. The other great thing about Swift Playgrounds is that it's free.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's free.
You can try it.
Several different Swift Playgrounds 1, 2, and 3 lessons are free. I think there's some other lessons within it that other people have made. I'm trying to remember, like, because it's almost like iBooks. You download Swift Playgrounds and then you download lessons within it.
Yeah.
But you can go pretty far.
Yeah.
So one of the things you were saying, you know, if you already knew Java or something like that, you'd be fine skipping along. How would you feel that a person would be comfortable after they learned a bit of Swift, you know, being inspired to go on to learn another programming language? Does it really allow that way?
Yeah, it's not in any way some lightweight like programming language. Like it's meant to be basically a C replacement.
Right.
It's you know, you can write apps for Mac and Linux and stuff like that in Swift. I mean, you can write real serious big boy apps and not just like, and then a lot of the, you know, even very, very fancy and very sophisticated iOS apps are written in Swift. So
yeah, when Swift was first unveiled, it was one of the big points that Apple was pushing was that, you know, it's better than C. You know,
right.
it cleans up a lot of messiness that C has, you know, but it's like C. So that way developers would be like, oh, I got to learn. Oh, but if it's like C, it's, you know, it's not that big a deal. So it was a way to make it more attractive and to get people to use it. So it's been one of Apple's more successful developmental tools.
Yeah, they're on to I think officially Swift 2 is the Swift version they're on or something. And that's what you learn when you grab Swift Playgrounds or something. I think it's just syntax issues and changes and stuff. But yeah.
If you want to learn more about Jason's experience with Swift Playgrounds, we have an article of that on our website.
It's a good article.
Yeah, it's a really good article. It was a lot of fun. I got to edit it, and it was a lot of fun because you get to see what Jason's experiences were with it. You know, a lot of people think of it as a kids app, and Apple does market that aspect of it very strongly. But don't let that turn you off to it. I mean,
yeah,
that
was my main takeaway is that I really kind of felt like, well, I'll go through this because this is how Apple wants kids to learn how to code.
Yeah.
And before I go diving into Xcode and stuff like that, I'll run through this. Why not? And I was surprised that within an hour I'm doing something where I was actually pretty engaged with, like, okay, how do I solve this puzzle? Well, how am I gonna, you know, what's my loop gonna be that I call a bunch of times to do all the parts of this little, you know, environment? and stuff like that. It was pretty. It was kind of entertaining in a way. I wish there was more than just seeing them dance when you when you complete it. But it was good. And by contrast, I thought I was gonna get to where I made an app in Xcode, and there was just such a gap there that I was like, oh man, that's like a whole other like project. Just I downloaded Xcode and I downloaded the sample thing, and I'm just like, I almost feel like I'm starting over. I understand these concepts, I understand this code, but I just feel like, well, here's a whole other different thing you can do if you want to actually make an app.
Yeah.
So,
well, maybe Apple will create a workflow.
an educational workflow, learning how to code workflow team.
It's an idea.
And they'll see how people are using these tools, and they'll finally create that bridge that seems like it needs to be there. So
that, and I think a reader brought this up a couple weeks ago when we were talking about the new iPad and stuff, where they said Xcode on iPad. I mean, that would in a way solve it. If you could do something in Swift Playgrounds, even sort of the third one where they get rid of Byte and they do more programming, more like app creation-y type stuff. If you could do that and say, well, now kick it over to Xcode and just kick my code over there, and I'll turn this into an app.
Yeah,
that would be a big step.
Yeah, that every year before WWDC, I think that's the one big product that people hope gets announced.
Yeah,
like, oh, one more thing. Xcode for iOS. Oh, the crowd would go wild, and there would be celebrations in the streets when that happens. But,
or conversely, Swift Playgrounds on a Mac. At least you could be on the same thing.
That's true.
This idea that you got to just jump platforms entirely to go from my learning what coding is to actually making an app. Is a big gap, big leap.
So.
Real quick. Well, I guess I have two things. First, as a former computer science major, was the first lesson Hello World?
No.
Oh,
in Swift Playgrounds?
Yeah.
No, in Swift Playgrounds, it's interesting because they're not making you build a program that runs like it would run on a screen. They give you have a little 3D environment that you can like drag around of blocks and stuff, and you have a little character named Byte on it, and you navigate him through this environment.
Okay.
So it's actually kind of like, if you remember the old, it's not really a programming language, but if you remember, what was the thing where you had the little carrot and you would draw lines and turn it?
Logo?
It's like Logo.
Yes.
It's a lot like, it reminds me of like a more sophisticated Logo. Okay. But you're learning concepts like, like here's a function. Well, this is what a function is. And it has the right syntax, like curly brackets and all this other stuff. You're doing all that stuff. So you learn those things doing a logo-like exercise of moving this guy around an environment.
All right. And then the other thing is Carlos on YouTube was asking about the Red again. One, I guess, starts at $699 with an 8 and 64, or a 64 and 256 gig option. But he's wondering if he waits until August, would it sell out? Or how does Apple deal with Red products and their limited availability? Is it just when they sell out and there's no clue?
I believe.
I haven't been tracking that. I always thought
that once they release it, they just have it till the end?
Yeah, I never thought they were limited. Was it limited?
They are. I think they have sold out
remember
before.
now.
They call them limited edition.
They're limited edition. They do. I'm just trying to. I've never heard of like a stampede to get them real fast.
Yeah.
I think how Apple always sells like last year's iPhone still at a lower price.
Right.
Like in a year, they're not still going to be selling the iPhone 8 Red, like product Red editions.
Well, let's see if I'll see if is the iPhone 7 Red still available. I don't know. Did they even come out with the Red?
That I don't know.
And the 7
It doesn't seem familiar. No.
or 7 Plus?
I don't
No,
see
I
one.
don't see one.
But
They have their own product Red site, maybe. I don't know.
that's,
I don't think they sell out super fast. Like you got to run and get one today. But August,
That's
Maybe.
risky.
yeah.
So it looks like there was an iPhone 7 product Red.
okay, so maybe the numbers are limited.
Mm-hmm.
But again, the iPhone 7's been out almost 2 years now.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So, the one thing about
A year and a half.
the Red coming out after the initial product release is that the demand. I mean, people want their new iPhones, they get them when they're initially released. So there's not this rush like there is for the red products,
Yeah.
it seems like. So, but yeah, Apple doesn't say that they only have X number of units that they're going to sell or anything.
Yeah,
like
I would
that.
think if they, I mean, they know they don't keep that much product in the pipeline, but I think what they do is
Yeah.
they just produce them for some months and then they kind of just
Right.
decide to taper it off at some point. Probably when the new iPhones are released or something. They
Yeah.
just sell whatever inventory they have. And
So apparently, with the 7, it was appearing on that page that you were looking at, where it showed the different colors on it. But it has recently disappeared. So that gives you an idea that Apple apparently doesn't announce when they've stopped selling it for the 7 and stuff.
I see.
So, but there were people making commentary about that. I just saw. So
Okay.
And Brian on YouTube is asking if Xcode goes to the iPad, would that mean the end of the Mac?
well, no, I mean, the Mac's useful for a whole lot of other things. Not
Right.
the only people with Macs are not programmers writing apps. God, Apple wishes, but
Well, yeah, that's that. Along with the always hoping the WWDC that people would wish that the want list of WWDC includes Xcode for iOS is the counter argument that the reason why they don't do that is because they want to sell Macs, because they want to sell Macs, they want to keep people using the Macs to develop software for iOS. So that's always been sort of the counter argument. And like you said, people are using Macs for other things as well. Also, there's still this sort of UI thing that people aren't comfortable using with. I know you're developing an iPad app on an iPad, so the UI kind of maybe isn't as much of a hindrance, but there's still sort of a UI preference for some people that, like one of the reasons why I don't use an iPad so much is because I prefer using a Mac and using a mouse or the trackpad and a keyboard.
yeah.
It's just there is a preference in terms of the tools that are available to you when you're developing or creating stuff on either platform. So, there's still that preference. And it is a developer market, so it's a smaller market than the general market. It's a small segment.
I don't know that it's ever going to happen. I think more likely is this Marzipan thing where we hear
Right.
about
Yes.
iOS
That's what'll
apps
happen.
running on Macs, and then that still helps close that thing where it's like, well, the thing that I'm programming this for and the thing that I tested on is a separate device from the thing that I'm actually programming it on,
Right.
and everything. And then you don't have that issue as much anymore.
Yeah.
Then it's just a matter of designing Swift Playgrounds and Xcode to kind of talk to each other and making a lesson where you build an app,
Yeah.
to kind of a real app, even if you can't literally put it on your phone, although that would be cool, like, Test Flight
Yeah.
or something, even if you're not going to publish it in the store, you could run it on your Mac as it would run on an iPhone.
Yeah. So, okay. Well, that just about does it for this week's episode of the Macworld Podcast. Actually, it's the 600th episode of the Macworld Podcast. So, we didn't do anything special. It was just
No.
another podcast. We'll wait for the 12.
I forgot we were coming up on it. It just seemed.
So,
1 week older. That's the mark.
yeah, it's just 1 week older. Maybe we'll do something at 1,000.
That's
8 years from now.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how many years from now is what's 400 weeks?
So, but yeah, so that just about does it for this week's episode of the Macworld Podcast. If you have any more comments or questions, anything you want us to cover in the podcast, let us know in the comments of Twitter and YouTube. We'll take a look at those. So, I'd like to thank Jason and Leif. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Dan, our producer. Thank
You're
you,
welcome, Roman.
Dan. And also like to thank you, the audience, for tuning in. Catch you next week. Next week, we'll most likely, we had to push the podcast back an hour for a meeting. But next week, we should be on our regular time that's 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Anybody know what time that is in China? I don't remember that.
No,
that
it's yesterday.
14
Right? It's
hours?
tomorrow.
It's tomorrow. And I want to say it's 14 hours ahead, but I don't remember exactly. Anyways, we'll probably be back at our regular time next week, 10 o'clock Pacific, on Twitter and YouTube. So see you next week. Thank you very much.